at the same time, we really want to get to some of the details from this really shocking and disturbing report from the UN about climate change. This is from the UN's climate panel. It's called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they're calling this a code red for humanity. So to give you a few of the details from the CNBC report, they are warning that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels is going to be beyond reach in the next 2 decades without immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, 1.5 degrees Celsius, that is the sort of threshold that scientists have long identified as a major tipping point, beyond which it becomes very difficult, beyond which you have irreversible damage that continues for potentially centuries, and that is going to make life very difficult for a lot of people around the world and make some parts of the globe, frankly, unlivable. So they're saying, basically, we're already effectively there. And then at 2 degrees Celsius of global warming, the report says that heat extremes would often reach critical tolerance thresholds for agriculture and health. Of course, this comes on the heels of, we've all been seeing, my God, these fires everywhere around the world. You have the coldest place on earth that was on Siberia. Fire. You've had droughts. We saw the flooding in Europe. Just this complete cavalcade of extreme weather events, one after another, that if that hasn't convinced you that we have to do something, that we have to act now, even if yes, sure, China is part of the problem too, but we also are a big part of the problem here, and we have to be able to do what we can that is within our control. So I also read the New York Times summary, had a good summary of the report as well. And they said that the world, this report finds, has already warmed about 1.1 degrees Celsius. It concludes that humans have put so much carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, this warming will continue until at least mid-century, even if nations take immediate steps to act. So the effects that we're seeing now, the droughts, the heat waves, the catastrophic downpours and flooding, those are going to continue to get worse for at least the next 30 years, even if we act in an extreme way today. So some of these things have taken on a life of their own. Some other impacts will continue for even longer. The ice sheets in Greenland and West Antarctica will continue to melt at least through the end of the century, and global sea levels will continue to rise for at least 2,000 years. So the report does not talk about specifics in terms of what nations should do with this information. However, there are 2 big takeaways. One, a lot of damage is already done. And in a lot of ways, the terrible things we're going to see, that we're seeing now, are going to continue no matter what action we can take. But that does not mean that we should not take action, because the report lays out 5 different potential climate futures, depending on how much we're able to limit greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide pollution, and keep that temperature range under control. It's the difference between, vast swaths of the planet being unrecognizable and unlivable, and being in a place where it's not great no matter what we do, but we can manage and potentially get through this in a way that doesn't destroy civilization. So that's where we are.
Yeah, absolutely devastating. The thing that haunts me is that every single time we hear from the scientists, they say, yeah, it looks like it's worse than the worst case scenario that we thought 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And, I'm no genius, but if every single time you revisit it, it's worse than the worst case scenario, bit of a trend there. And that's something to really fear. Now, do we have the video of the fire that we wanted to show everybody? Yeah, let's take a look at this, because this is really apocalyptic.
People fleeing an island in Greece from wildfires that you can see in the background there. And, I mean, it just looks absolutely apocalyptic. And at the same time right now, the Dixie Fire in Northern California is that state's 2nd largest wildfire in history. The smoke from that is so intense that it's reaching places and impacting places as far away as your home in New York City.
That's right. I'll tell that story.
So, these fires, the droughts, the flooding, all of this isn't one-off. Oh, there are things happen in the weather and the wildfires aren't new. I get that a lot. Like, oh, there were never wildfires before. What are you talking about? Well, the scientists are saying the amount and the intensity of all of these things would not be possible without climate change. And I was just reading as well, Seattle, which normally has very temperate and rainy, almost rainforest climate, are in for another triple-digit heat wave. Unprecedented, after they just had multiple other record-breaking heat waves. So this is the cycle that we're in, and the failure to act to this point has already created devastating consequences. The best we can do is keep it from getting even worse than the track that we're already on.
So to your point, Seattle was a lot more like Phoenix there for a while. I think they hit 115 degrees.
Insane.
It was so hot that some of the roads were buckling.
Right.
Yes.
And a lot of people there don't even have air conditioning.
That's right.
Because Seattle is not supposed to be 100 degrees.
I think it's over 50%. That's what I read. It was some freakishly high number that I couldn't believe. I mean, yes, so it absolutely scary. People died as a result of it. The thing you said about New York, yeah, it was a very strange experience because usually this time of year in New York, it's sunny all the time. And, there was like 4 or 5 days there where it was just, it's not like anything I've ever seen because it clearly wasn't cloudy. It was just like really hazy. And then come to find out, yeah, this is the smoke from the giant wildfires out west that made its way all the way across the US and parked itself over New York for days. And I was like, this is crazy. I've never seen anything like this before. And there's a few facts that I think are underreported, which really might help move the needle a little bit in the climate change discussion. But I remember a few years ago reading an article about how the Middle East at some point is going to become uninhabitable. And that some point is actually rather soon, relatively speaking. By 2100, it could be uninhabitable.
Wow.
And then guess what, guys? When you have a Middle East that's uninhabitable, you're going to have a giant immigration crisis, the likes of which we've never seen before, that you can't compare just the Syria and the Iraq situation to this. It would be far, far worse than that.
Yep.
And then, of course, we've discussed the wet bulb temperatures before, where there's a temperature where it's uninhabitable for people to live that involves not just the dry heat, but it's humid heat. And that, I remember being surprised. That number was actually lower than I thought. Wasn't it like 88 degrees with humidity above 90% or something like that?
Something like that,
yeah. And so there are going to be a number of places that basically uninhabitable. But I do want to give everybody a little bit of hope, even though it seems we sound really grim and pessimistic, because there is a way to look at this that is positive. And the way to look at it that's positive is, take the Great Depression, for example. Really, ultimately, FDR viewed that as an opportunity to remake the country, remake the economy, get people to work, do something positive. And as terrible as climate change is, yeah, if you do a New Deal and you basically retool our economy and go 100% in the direction of renewable energy, then you absolutely can have the inevitable patents for the next generation.
Yeah.
So this can be a giant boon to America and American industry and working people. We just have to dedicate ourselves to that path and really invest in that path and basically take lemons and turn them into lemonade. Because if we could use this towards, a brighter future, towards people working, towards retooling our economy for positive ends, honestly, then it really is an opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's the only silver lining I could think of. But if we don't decide to go down that path, we're screwed.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's it. And that was the real innovation of the framework of the Green New Deal. First of all, framing it in those New Deal terms, and also leading with job creation and making sure that, it's not what the typical tension of like, oh, well, you're going to fight climate change and I'm not going to be able to feed my family.
Right, you're going to ruin jobs.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm focusing on my family and future generations. Good luck to you. Of course, that's been, vilified, demonized, not just by Republicans, by the way, but actually I think Democrats have been far more effective at demonizing Green New Deal and taking that off the table than Republicans have been able to. I mean, there's a few things that I think. First of all, it just makes it absolutely clear what complete evil villains these fossil fuel companies have been, that have hid the science and lied about the science and continue to lie and obfuscate and try to convince people that there's going to be this like miracle technological solution that we'll be able to keep doing everything as we are. We're just going to come up with this, miracle technology that makes all these problems go away so that we can keep making our profits the way that we have been and you guys don't have to change your behavior and any of that. So that's one piece. But the other thing, to your point about a sort of New Deal style or World War II style mobilization, which is what we hear, the rhetoric we hear from politicians all the time, including Joe Biden, is like, we got to have a World War II mobilization. We got to act. I saw he tweeted something yesterday like, the world can't wait. We've got to act. yeah, you are the most powerful person on the planet. And the Gravel Institute actually tweeted this like, dude, you're the president of the United States. You are the most powerful man on the planet. If someone is not acting, that someone is you. And as we were discussing earlier, imagine the insanity of saying and maybe actually believing this is a red alert for humanity. We need a World War II style mobilization. And then being like, but if the parliamentarian says no, well, maybe next time. I mean, that's insane. That is truly insane. But the unfortunate part of the problem with climate change is it's not an issue that our political system, or apparently any political system really, though some countries do a lot better job than we do, is set up to handle well. Because when there's a clear, like a villain or a clear and present danger that's gonna, threatening life like tomorrow instantaneously, we generally at least used to know how to get our act together and mobilize and deal with that threat, whatever the cost, and rearrange society and impose burdens on some people in order to be able to get that done. But when it's this slow-moving crisis where it's amorphous and there's not one clear villain that you could say, that's the bad guy and let's all rally around the flag and go out and get him, it's very, very difficult to get people to actually respond because everyone's living in this denial of like, my family is ultimately going to be okay.
Yeah.
Everybody's living in this denial of not really having the imagination to understand what, like you said, with the potential massive migration flows and the way that could upend politics and create war and catastrophe and, I mean, just the most like civilizational dire consequences that you can possibly imagine. So that's why there's just been, and you couple that with, like I said before, the fossil fuel industry being the worst actors possible, and plenty of politicians, all of the Republicans, and plenty of the Democrats as well, doing the bidding of those companies at the expense of, the best interests of the country and the planet. And you end up with the situation that we're in right now where even in the best of circumstances, if we act today, if we implemented the entire Green New Deal today and like took dramatic steps that aren't even on the table now with what Joe Biden is saying, you still have at least 30 more years of the type of events we've been having getting worse and worse and worse.
So I have a lot to say about that. First of all, I do put a little bit of the blame when it comes to the issue of the Green New Deal. I actually do put it on some of the people who crafted it, because it should have been very targeted and specific and focused as a New Deal with an emphasis on jobs programs, and those jobs programs really are in the spirit of and in the vein of and in the direction of green technology, renewable technology, reworking our energy grid, so on and so forth. Yeah. And unfortunately, it really did become this grab bag of every single left-wing idea that you could think of that really had nothing to do with the original idea of a Green New Deal or a New Deal. So I do put some of the blame on them, but really, I mean, just go back to the drawing board and start pushing it as what I'm talking about and what you're talking about, and then, yeah, maybe the conversation will change. But unfortunately, I do think they messed that up. You made a good point. I do think that human nature, there's something in human nature where we can't conceive of a threat that long term. So everybody just defaults to, well, I'm okay now and my family's going to be okay, and so we're going to handle it. But since it's so far out, it's like people feel like, this isn't all that tangible because we have all these more pressing issues. Yeah. And that's a flaw in human nature. I think it really is. And then the final thing is, to your point about big oil, I actually think it's worse than that. I don't think they're like colossal immoral actors. I actually think big oil is amoral, because the whole point of being a corporation is that you're an amoral machine and all you're trying to do is maximize profits for your shareholders. So what they end up doing is the logical thing in the context of the current system, which is by the entire Republican Party, by some of the Democrats, enough of the Democrats, and all you have to do in order to win this debate and this discussion on climate change is raise doubt. Because as long as there's some doubt, even if it's just 5% doubt, well, that 5% doubt is going to stop you from acting and doing anything giant, which is what needs to be done in order to address this. And so that's why, and you could, this is directly from the fossil fuel industry themselves, with all like the pseudo-intellectuals that they buy to raise doubt on this stuff. Yeah. And now they've even gotten to the point where they've given up on arguing the merits of it. They used to say, oh, it's not real. Then it became, oh, climate change is real, but there's nothing we can do about it. And now it's just, well, the procedures don't allow us to address it in any serious substantive way. So the procedures are what they are, the laws are what they are, what are we gonna do? So they keep moving the goalposts, but yeah, hopefully, you just hope that at some point there is no more doubt and we can really act in a serious way.
Yeah, their strategy now is to, number one, back solutions that they know have zero chance of politically passing. And again, this all comes from this ExxonMobil lobbyist. And that conversation was incredibly revealing. That was leaked from an environmental activist group in the UK. Number one, back solutions so you can cloak yourself in like, oh, of course we care about climate change and the planet, et cetera, et cetera. Solutions that you know are never going to happen. And technologies that are like miracle, silver bullet type technologies that, like I was saying before, would just allow you to continue to operate. But that's the sort of thing also that forestalls action, because if you put that out there of like, oh, we're going to be able to, have this thing and we're inventing it right now as we speak and we're putting all kinds of money towards it. So don't worry, guys, it's going to be good to go. That's another way of forestalling action. The last piece I wanted to add to this, just to show you the distance between the Biden administration's rhetoric and what they're actually doing, is a great piece from TNR talking about really laying out a framework that I think is important, which fits into the conversation that we're having, that like, okay, now at this point, most people accept the science is real, the climate is changing, and this is a problem. The new form of denialism is basically throwing up all the roadblocks for why you can't take action, or creating, the most limited, like, greenwashing action of all time in order to just sort of like cloak yourself and, I care and I'm doing something about it and we can move on to the next issue. If we can throw that tear sheet up on the screen from the New Republic about Biden. And so what the Biden administration, one of the big things that they've been focused on and emphasizing is a move to electric vehicles. And it's at the core of their climate agenda. And they write here, this is Kate Aronoff, she writes, their thinking is that with the right incentives, the U.S. can transform a historically important sector into an engine of green job creation and decarbonization. All sounds great, right? So what have they actually done in terms of sparking this electric vehicle revolution, which again, on its own wouldn't even be sufficient, but sure, step in the right direction. They announced they'd reached a non-binding deal with the country's biggest automakers that half their new vehicles would be electric plug-in or hybrid by 2030. That target falls short of what the car companies themselves had previously pledged. The funding for achieving the goal is next to nothing. They're dramatically behind competitors like China, for example, that gets held down as like, we can't really do anything because China's terrible. So it just shows you that for all of their language about taking this seriously and how much they care, the thing that they did on electric vehicles, the core of what they are talking about with regards to climate, is a non-binding pledge that the automakers themselves had already voluntarily pledged to go beyond. So it's pathetic. That's all I can say is it's pathetic.
That deal is like Joe Biden and the corporate Democrats summed up in a nutshell.
It totally is. Yeah, it totally is. But they'll go out and, we're historic deal and never before in the history of the nation. It's practically like FDR. And that's the reality of what they're doing. Yeah,
so your options are that deal, or somebody who's like, none of this is real, bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. That's better than what Trump was doing. Trump was actively like, let's pollute as much as possible. Let's cut down all the forests. Let's drill everywhere we can. So it's better, I guess, but it's just such so radically
damning
below.
With faint praise, tallest kid in kindergarten type stuff.
Exactly.
Sad.
I mean, radically, and that's what this report spells out, is how radically below where we need to be, even the most ambitious proposals of the Biden administration are at this point.
Sad.
Indeed. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.